I'm Dr. Judy Melinek. I'm a board-certified forensic pathologist, and I just watched the Nolan Wells press conference, and I wanted to share some context for everyone. State the cause of death after a body has not been found for several days and has been subsequently autopsied twice with signs of decomposition is incredibly unlikely. That when you've got a fresh body, you want to be able to look at the body and see if there's any other causes of death for that body that is found in water that exclude the death being exclusively a drowning. If a person is strangled and they die from strangulation and then their dead body is thrown in the water, their body will take on water, but the cause of death is going to be strangulation, not drowning. Also, for any kind of traumatic injuries. His body was found 2 days after he disappeared, and this second autopsy done by Dr. Roger Mitchell wasn't until 4 days later. So we're dealing with quite a bit of decomposition, even if the body was refrigerated during that time. And there's one other important piece of information from that press conference, which is that the neck block, the portion of the neck from the front end, was missing. So Dr. Mitchell did not have a chance to examine that part of Nolan Wells' anatomy. So you may ask, is this common practice for pathologists to keep a portion of the anatomy with them at the medical examiner's office and not release it to the family?
2 days missing, 2 autopsies, and still no answer. That's where we are right now with the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells. You just heard from Dr. Judy Melinek, a board-certified forensic pathologist, not affiliated with this case, giving her honest read on what's been made public so far. And there's one detail in what she just said that most people are going to miss the first time they hear it. So here's the question we're going to answer in this video. What exactly can a forensic pathologist tell from a body that's already been in the water for days? What can't they tell? And why is there a piece of evidence in this case that hasn't been released to anyone, not even the family's own independent examiner? Stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why undetermined doesn't mean nothing happened, and why the words manual strangulation are now part of this conversation at all. Let's lay out exactly what we know, in order, because the timeline matters more than people realize. July 4th. Nolan Wells is on a boat trip with friends off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, headed to Horn Island. At some point, the group gets separated. His friends return to the mainland. Nolan does not. A search begins that night and stretches on for 2 days. July 6th. Nolan's body is recovered near the island. At that point, local officials publicly state that no foul play is suspected. Hold on to that detail. We're coming back to it. A state autopsy follows. Its full findings haven't been released to the public. Nolan's family, his mother, Christine Wansley, and his father, Elmore Wansley, aren't satisfied with the pace of information they're getting. So they commission their own independent autopsy, performed by Dr. Roger Mitchell, and bring on attorney Ben Crump to represent them. That second autopsy comes back with one word: undetermined. Not accident, not homicide, undetermined. The rest of this video is about what that word actually means, and what it doesn't. To understand that, you need one core concept in forensic pathology. Drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion.
Drowning is what's called a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that when you've got a fresh body, you want to be able to look at the body and see if there's any other causes of death for that body that is found in water that exclude the death being exclusively a drowning. So for example, if someone is shot and then thrown in the water, you'll have that gunshot and they'll be bleeding and the gunshot will be the cause of death, and the thrown in the water is not the cause of death. It's not even on the death certificate. If a person is strangled and they die from strangulation and then their dead body is thrown in the water, their body will take on water, but the cause of death is going to be strangulation, not drowning. Also, for any kind of traumatic injuries.
Postmortem exam was done on a body that had been several days from being found. So we're dealing with, I believe, 2 days between when Nolan Wells was first missing and when his body was found and then autopsied, and another 4 days that have passed until the second postmortem exam. So the body is decomposed, it falls apart after death, and discoloration could be a sign of injury, like bleeding, or it could also be a sign of some sort of pressure being applied, potentially during the first autopsy itself. So this particular location on the back of the head is a common area where we place a block during the first autopsy, and that may have been the source of the discoloration, and it may have absolutely nothing to do with trauma. The only way to know is to get pieces of tissue under the microscope, and that is something that Dr. Mitchell, the pathologist who did the second autopsy, is going to be doing, to look to see if that discoloration is bleeding or hemorrhage, or dissect that area, because they don't see anything on the surface of the skin when the body is fresher, so they don't suspect that there's any trauma there. And they may have other parts of the body that have significant findings that they're focusing their attention on. So it's not unusual for a second autopsy pathologist who's given a body that is starting to decompose to work harder to look at areas that the first pathologist may not have looked at, because they hadn't suspected injury there, since when the body was fresh, they didn't see any external signs of injury.
When you put all these pieces together, a concerning pattern emerges. We have early public statements that predetermined the conclusion before forensic analysis was complete. We have timing issues that compromised evidence quality. We have missing anatomical evidence crucial for ruling out alternative causes of death. And we have toxicology results that may be difficult to interpret accurately due to decomposition factors. None of this proves the official conclusion is wrong, but it demonstrates that the official conclusion was reached without access to all evidence normally considered essential for such a determination. More troubling, it demonstrates investigative procedures that fall short of the standards that should govern death investigations. Dr. Melinek's analysis isn't claiming to solve the case. She's identifying limitations and gaps that prevent anyone from reaching a truly definitive conclusion based on available evidence. When a forensic pathologist says a case determination is unreliable due to missing evidence and procedural issues, that's a fundamental challenge to the scientific validity of the investigation. The family's decision to seek independent verification wasn't based on emotion or denial. It was based on legitimate concerns about whether proper forensic protocols had been followed. Dr. Melinek's analysis suggests those concerns were justified. This raises broader questions about death investigations, particularly in smaller jurisdictions where resources may be limited and relationships between agencies can complicate independence. When the same people making initial determinations are responsible for reviewing their own work, confirmation bias becomes significant. The retention of neck structures creates a particularly troubling situation. If those structures showed evidence of trauma, that evidence exists and could definitively change the case determination. If they showed no trauma, that information could help confirm the original conclusion. Either way, the information exists, but remains inaccessible to independent verification. The scientific method requires peer review and independent verification. These principles aren't optional in forensic science. They're fundamental to ensuring accurate results. When compromised, whether intentionally or through procedural shortcuts, the reliability of results becomes questionable. This case is far from over, despite official attempts to characterize it as closed. Dr. Melinek's analysis has identified specific evidence that could still provide answers if made available for proper examination. The original autopsy report, containing the state's findings about retained neck structures, remains unreleased. That document could clarify whether evidence of trauma was found and explain the reasoning behind retaining the structures. The retained tissue samples still exist and could theoretically be examined by independent experts if access were granted. Most importantly, the toxicology analysis could be properly interpreted by experts who understand decomposition factors. Raw numbers without proper context can be misleading, but qualified interpretation could provide meaningful information about Nolan's condition at the time of death. These aren't unreasonable requests. They're basic elements of scientific transparency that should be standard in all death investigations. The family isn't asking for special treatment. They're asking for complete disclosure and access to independent verification. We're going to continue following this case and monitoring for developments. When official documents are released, we'll analyze them thoroughly. When new expert opinions emerge, we'll examine them carefully. The truth in cases like this rarely emerges quickly. It requires persistent attention, careful analysis, and willingness to ask uncomfortable questions about investigative procedures. Dr. Melinek's professional analysis has provided a roadmap for what questions need asking and what evidence would be needed to answer them definitively. If you want to stay informed about developments, instead of relying on mainstream coverage that may miss technical details, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Cases like this can see sudden developments, and the next piece of evidence could emerge at any time. The family deserves answers based on complete forensic analysis, not partial examinations with missing evidence. The public deserves to know whether proper investigative protocols were followed. Dr. Melinek's analysis has opened the door to questions that haven't been answered. Whether those questions will ultimately change the official determination remains to be seen, but they definitely deserve to be asked and answered based on all available evidence.